Hi, I'm Paul Edwards. I'm an independently published horror author, and first and foremost, a monster kid. And tonight, we're going to be looking at War of the Monsters from 1966, and we're going to be talking about why Barugon lost. Let's go back one movie to 1965. Dai Studios, which was a rival movie company to Toho Studios, they wanted to create their own monster character to rival the Godzilla series, which was very successful. And so they came up with the monster Gamera. Gamera was a gigantic prehistoric turtle who could breathe fire and could retract his limbs and shoot jets out in their place so that he could spin around and fly like a flying saucer. Gamera had his own movie in 1965. Gamera was unleashed on the world the same year I was. And it was very successful in Japan. So they authorized a big budget to do the first sequel, War of the Monsters. And the first step up they made was to make it in color, because the first film had been in black and white. And another step they made to improve the quality of the movie was to hire real actors, big name in Japan actors. And in a way that sort of backfired on them, because there was one particular actor who they hired to play the male lead in this film, Kojiro Hongo. And Hongo signed the contract, but then he didn't really want to be in a monster movie. So he pretended that he was sick, just like a kid trying to get out of an exam in school. He pretended he was sick, and he figured they would just recast the role. But instead, they said, well, we'll come and visit you, see how sick you are. So he's at home, the studio executives are coming over. He puts bloody tissues in the trash and pretends to have the chills real bad, thinking the studio executives are going to say, oh, you can't do it, we'll recast the role. So the executives came over to his house, believed that he was really sick, and said, okay, we'll just put a hold on production until you feel better. So he was stuck. He had to do it. So against his wishes, he went ahead and starred in this picture. And basically what happens in this film is it's, as you can tell from the title, a battle between Gamera and a new monster, Barugon. Not to be confused with Barugon from the Toho films, different monster, similar name. So what happens in this film is interesting. I'm going to give you a summary of the plot, and there are two huge plot holes. And let's see, even if you've never seen the film, see if you can find the two huge plot holes just from me describing it, okay? The previous film ended when they had tricked Gamera into a big rocket, the Z rocket, and launched him into outer space, and they were sending him to go live on Mars. They did that. They didn't kill him because they wanted to make a series of these. So in the first scene of this movie, War of the Monsters, we see that a meteor crashed into the Z rocket, destroying the Z rocket and freeing Gamera, who turns on his jets and starts spinning around like a flying saucer and happily flies through space and returns to Earth. Okay. Meanwhile, the main characters get involved in this jungle adventure where they are in search of a huge opal that somebody found during World War II and left on this island. Huge opal, should be priceless. And so a group of characters goes to the jungle and they do find the opal and recover it and bring it back to Japan. But as they're arriving in the harbor, what happens is that the opal, quote unquote, hatches because it's actually the egg of a giant monster. And in no time flat, the monster expands and the ship sinks right there in the harbor. And out pops Barugon, a quadruped dragon with a big horn on its snout and spikes going down its back. And Barugon is splashing around in the harbor and is, mighty and strong and knocks over a warehouse on the docks as he stamps ashore coming out of the water, and he's as strong as can be, and he starts on a rampage through the city, as giant monsters are wont to do. So Gamera comes to fight Barugon, and they did one thing in this picture that I really liked a lot. They set the fight at night. I don't know why studios feel compelled to shoot giant monster fight scenes during the day. Night seems much more natural. You can light up the city and, have it be a little spookier that way. So for once they got it right in this film, they did set the big fight scene at night. And Gamera gets his licks in, but it turns out that Barugon has a special power. He can blast out at freeze breath, like Superman has freeze breath. And when he blasts out his freeze breath, it covers everything with ice. And when he gets Gamera with that, Gamera gets frozen solid because he's vulnerable to the cold. And so Gamera is frozen like a statue covered in frost. And Barugon crawls over and stands on top of him in triumph. And then Barugon crawls off and continues his path of destruction. Okay? So the human beings keep coming up with ideas of how they're going to beat Barugon, some of which are somewhat clever. Barugon has a special ray that he shoots out, a rainbow ray. And they find out that because it's a light weapon, they can use a big mirror to reflect it back at him. And they try that, and it does hurt him, but it doesn't kill him, and he keeps on attacking. And so finally, Gamera thaws out, because even though he's vulnerable to the cold, he eventually the temperature rises and he's okay again. And so he comes for a second showdown with Barugon. And if you were at all familiar with giant monster movies, you know that the bad monster wins the first fight and the good monster wins the second fight. So everybody knows Gamera's going to win here. And that's not a spoiler, because Gamera always wins. So Gamera discovers that Barugon has one weakness, which the humans are aware of, that he can't stand water. He has hydropathy, like a rabid animal. Rabid animals are repulsed by water, like cats are repulsed by water. And Barugon just can't stand water. He's vulnerable to it. He can't get wet at all. So Gamera manages to drag Barugon into the harbor, and Barugon doesn't last 2 seconds. As soon as he's immersed in water, he's had it. And he flails around a little and tries one more time to shoot his rainbow ray, but it dies, and so does he. That's the end of Barugon. And Gamera wins, and he flies off to live to fight another day. Okay. Did you catch the two huge plot holes? Plot hole number one. Barugon emerged in the harbor and was perfectly fine in the water when the egg hatched. He was fine in the harbor. He was strong as could be. But at the end of the movie, all of a sudden he's vulnerable to water, and even touching water weakens him, and Gamera easily overpowers him that way. Makes no sense. A bigger plot hole, I think, is Gamera's vulnerability to cold, because they made a point of showing us that the only reason Gamera lost that first fight was that Barugon blasted him with that cold ray, right? But earlier in this same movie, we saw Gamera fly in outer space, where the temperature is even colder. It's absolute zero in outer space, and he was just fine. And subsequent Gamera movies show Gamera routinely flying through space, just like he flies through the sky. Outer space is not a problem for Gamera. So why would the cold of, an icy breath affect him when the much deeper cold of outer space, interplanetary space, does nothing to him? Makes no sense whatsoever. And I have a feeling that although these movies were somewhat targeted to children, and as the Gamera movies went on, they started targeting them more and more to children, and they became more and more kid-friendly. But in this movie, they were actually playing it completely serious. And I have a feeling, though, that even children watching this would think of these things. I know, because when I was a child and I saw it, I would think, why is Gamera okay flying in outer space if he can't even stand the ice breath from this monster? Doesn't make sense. So One of the rules that I try to use in my own book series, the Mourner's Woods books, is that your premise can be as outlandish as you want, as far out as you want. You want to put in monsters, ghosts, space aliens, go to town, that's fine. Readers will grant you your initial premise, but from that premise, everything has to be logical. If this monster exists, then such and such must be true. An example I like to give is the Loch Ness Monster. Suppose you write a book that there's a Loch Ness Monster. Okay, great, I'll accept that. But if there's a Loch Ness Monster, there has to be more than one of them. There can't just be one single organism that's lived for millions of years. There must be a whole colony of them living in the lake and, reproducing and taking the population through generation after generation. So, okay, flying giant turtle, great. But if he can fly in outer space, then the cold shouldn't bother him at all. Giant dragon that hatches out of an opal and expands to 1,000 times the size of the opal in like 5 minutes. Okay. But if he's okay in the harbor, then why is he vulnerable to water in the rest of the picture? It doesn't make any sense. Audiences will accept your initial premise, but everything flowing from that premise has to be logical and reasonable. If these facts were true, then these other facts would logically follow. So, the real question is, why Barugon lost? And it's hard to give a good answer on this because really the good answer is because he was suddenly vulnerable to water when he wasn't previously. But if you're going to say that, then you also have to say that the only reason Gamera lost the first round is because he was suddenly vulnerable to cold when he wasn't previously. So why Barugon lost, I think there's one clear answer to. Stan Lee gave the answer to this when he was asked about comic book characters fighting. And he gave a whole commentary on how he didn't like when people asked what would happen if this comic character fought that comic character. Because the answer was always the same. The answer was, the winner will be whoever the writer wants to win. If Spider-Man is fighting the Hulk and the writer wants the Hulk to win, the Hulk will win. If Spider-Man is fighting the Hulk and the writer wants Spider-Man to win, they'll find a way for Spider-Man to win. The winner is going to be whoever the writer wants to be. And that's the fundamental difference between actual competitions and fictional competitions, is that there's a writer in control in the fictional competition. Which brings me to why blank lost. In case you don't know and didn't see the previous video, this is a running gag now. My friend Jessica Lewis co-hosts a podcast on Rob Has a Website called Why Blank Lost. And each week she and her co-host talk about which reality TV contestants lost that week and why. So as sort of a gag, I'm donning her t-shirt, her show's t-shirt, and doing Why Blank Lost monster version. And I did one on Godzilla versus the Thing, and we've done now War of the Monsters. And let's see how many I can do before she eventually notices and calls me up and says, Paul, stop doing those. So you should check out her show, though, Why Blank Lost, if you're at all into Survivor. But assuming you're watching this video, I'm assuming that you're into kaiju. And Gamera went on to have many more battles, both in the classic giant monster era, and then they revived him in the 1990s with modern special effects, which was very successful and excellent, but that's food for another video. I used to see War of the Monsters on Creature Double Feature on a double bill with War of the Gargantuas. War of the Monsters and War of the Gargantuas. That was a common double feature shown on TV in the 1970s in Boston on Creature Double Feature. And behind me, you may notice that there is a Gamera figure. It's actually one of my favorite vintage kaiju figures. It's a figure of the classic Gamera. And you can tell that Gamera is in excellent physical condition because he has 30-pack abs. So there's my Gamera. I don't have a Barugon. I have a Barugon from the Toho films, but that's no good here. So that's War of the Monsters for you. And I hope you enjoyed hearing about this great old kaiju film. If you're at all interested in classic monsters and vintage horror, check out my book series, the Mourner's Woods books. They're available on Amazon.com. My name again is Paul Edwards, and my books are the Mourner's Woods books. I got lots of monsters in different books, and they're all freestanding stories. You can read them in any order. So that's all for today, and I will see you in Mourner's Woods.